Last Sunday, I gave a little children's sermon about M&Ms and said that I would give the adults a sermon about M&Ms today. Do the M&Ms belong in the kitchen or in the living room? That's the title. But after listening to the reading of these two texts, you may have realized that the M&Ms I'm talking about have nothing to do with candy. The M&Ms are Martha and Mary. Do the Marthas and Marys belong in the kitchen or in the living room? Are the Billies and Barrys, the Kims or Kathys, or the Jacks and Johns? The kitchen and the living room in our text today are located in a house in the little town of Bethany. It is where two sisters live named Martha and Mary, and Jesus is visiting them. Martha is busy working, cleaning, serving, cooking. Her sister Mary, on the other hand, is on her rump, listening with Jesus. And after a while, Martha has had enough. She's resentful about doing all the work herself. She says, Jesus, tell my sister to get up and start helping. There's work to be done. Jesus says, Martha, what Mary has chosen is the better part. What she is doing is best. Now, I've always felt a little sorry for old Martha. Here she is doing all of the dirty work, yet Jesus takes up for Mary. And I could see Martha kind of mumbling under her breath, yes, Jesus, you say that now, but wait till you want some tea with your dinner and you don't have any. But Jesus isn't saying that working is not important. He's saying there's a time for everything, and Mary is really good at determining when to do things. She's good at living in the moment, in the presence, and that good at being present. She's good at recognizing priorities. And the priority for Mary is spending time with Christ. This story could be a huge metaphor for the importance of spending time with God. It is a great metaphor for that. But this story also teaches us how important it is to spend time with our family members and with our friends, with our loved ones, with our church family. We can understand this a bit better by looking at another story that involves Martha and Mary. It was our second reading today. The story, by the way, is told in all four of the Gospels. Very important story for the early church, but every story is different in each of the Gospels. It's told differently. In fact, in three of the Gospel stories, the woman who is the main player in the story is not identified. But in the Gospel of John, our text today, the writer gives us a name. He says it's Mary, the sister of Martha. And Jesus is again in Bethany at their house. A dinner is being held in Jesus' honor. And guess who is at work serving? That's right, good old Martha. Mary becomes the main player in the scene because she gets a bottle of expensive perfume, pours it on the feet of Jesus, and then she washes those tired, well-worn feet. It must have felt so good. But when some of the disciples see what Mary is doing, they get on to her. We could have sold that expensive perfume and given the money to the poor, could have helped the poor with it. And Jesus says, hey, leave Mary alone. You will always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. In other words, Mary again has chosen the better part, the better thing to do. You will always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. These words of Jesus remind me of the words we often use for our benediction, words by philosopher Henri Amiel. Life is short, and we don't have much time to gladden the hearts of those who traveled away with us. So be swift to love and make haste to be kind. You will always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. Sometimes we tend to take the people closest to us for granted. We often give them the leftovers in our lives because we can. They'll understand. They know how busy we are, and most of them will still care for us and love us. Jesus reminds us that our loved ones, our friends, are rare treasures that are not permanent, and that we should not take them for granted. We should treasure them. We shouldn't give them the leftovers. We should give them the good stuff. This Wednesday, I had to go to Tifton for several days for the South Georgia United Methodist Annual Conference, and so late Tuesday night, I had to do some laundry. And when I put my clothes in the washer, I noticed that there were a lot of items on top of the dryer. The items had been there for a long time, and so I thought I would take them off and wipe down the dryer and clean off, especially clean off the top. And one of the items had been on the dryer apparently for a very long time and must have had some crazy chemicals in it, because when I took it off, a large square section of the white enamel or paint or whatever it is had eroded off of the top. And when I cleaned and wiped down the dryer, my paper towel had rust all over it from this large section that was missing the white layer. And I said, oh no, our clean clothes can get rust on them if this is not fixed. And so then I said, this is a job for Rust-Oleum. Now some of you out there are very surprised that I know what Rust-Oleum is. You will be even more surprised that I even had some in the house. I had to use some about 8 years ago for something. And by the way, if you're not a handyman or fixer-upper like I am and don't know what Rust-Oleum is, it is a brown, rusty liquid that you put over eroded, rusty metal to keep it from rusting more. Plus, it puts a layer over the rust so that the rust won't get on anything like clean clothes. And so I took my 8-year-old can of Rust-Oleum and went to work. And I sprayed and put a big brown patch of Rust-Oleum on top of our white dryer. It's not very pretty, but I figured our dry cleaner wasn't going to be entering a beauty contest. And plus, it's back in the utility room, only Sherry and I see it. The next morning, I'm in bed, and Sherry wakes me up and says, "What in the world did you spill all over our dryer? It's taking me all morning to clean it up." Then she says, "It sure has been hard to find something to take it off, but I finally discovered that one of my oils will do the trick." I know some of you use her essential oils, as do I, but I tell you, if that oil takes off Rust-Oleum, I wouldn't put it on your skin. Now, Sherry's had a tough year due to the health of her parents. She's an only child, and so a lot has fallen on her shoulders. And then last week, as many of you know, her father had a stroke, and he's still in the hospital. And Sherry's practically lived at the hospital or at the assisted living home where her mother is so I couldn't believe she was actually taking the time to clean the big spill on the dryer. Fortunately, we were both able to laugh off this situation of miscommunication and put things in perspective. But that wasn't always the case for us. There is one occasion I especially remember when our miscommunication or disagreement almost ended our relationship. Sherry and I dated for 4 years before we got married, and late in those years of courtship, we got into a doozy of an argument. The strange thing is, I don't even remember what it was about. But I remember that it threatened the future of our relationship. And I remember that the night it happened, I could not sleep. I was so distraught that I had to talk to someone, but it was 2 o'clock in the morning. The person I really wanted to talk to was a man named Jerry Everly. Some of you know Jerry. In fact, he preached for us last summer when I was away. Jerry was a close friend. He and his wife, Carolyn. Jerry's a minister and was certainly one of my mentors at Marble Collegiate Church. But he lived in Glen Rock, New Jersey, which was about 40 minutes outside of Manhattan. I lived in Queens, on the other side of Manhattan. So the plan was this. I would get in my car in Queens, drive over the Queensboro Bridge, which is often called the 59th Street Bridge, drive into Manhattan, get on 57th Street, drive from the east side of town to the west side of town, then drive down to the Lincoln Tunnel, which I would go through, and that would take me into New Jersey, and then I would drive to Glen Rock, and then I would park my car in front of the Everly's house until daybreak. And then when the Everlys got up, I would knock on their door and say, "Surprise! Need to talk." I know that sounds crazy, but I was crazy. I was desperate. And these were people, Jerry and Carolyn, you could do that kind of thing with. They were close friends and would understand. So I get into my little 626 Mazda, cross the 59th Street Bridge into Manhattan, get on 57th Street, start driving to the west side of town. Around 8th Avenue, I caught a stoplight, and there was one car in front of me. The light turns green. The car in front of me starts moving. I put my foot on the gas pedal to press down. And as I did, out of nowhere, from right to left, this 18-wheeler, this massive, long truck, sails through the stoplight at highway speed, running into the side of the car in front of me, carrying it 25 yards and wrapping it around a pole like a pretzel. Fortunately, it was this huge tank of a car, built like a tank. You would never know it to see it smashed and wrapped around the pole, but because of the size and strength of the car, the driver, who was the only person in the car, was able to climb out of the car through the non-existent window. He couldn't use the door because the door was no longer a door. And since police are all over Manhattan, the police and medical help were there in no time. After they arrived, I started back on my journey to the Everly's house. The whole time I'm driving to New Jersey, I'm reliving what I just experienced, seeing that huge truck smash into the car right in front of me. And I realized that I could have very easily have been the first car at the stoplight, that I could have been the one hit. And I thought about how small and paper thin my little 626 Mazda was, and if that huge truck had hit me, then I most likely would not be around to argue with Sherry anymore. And as I drove, I thought about Sherry and realized how close I had come to never seeing her again. And how bad it would have been for our last words to have been words of anger and hurt. And so I reached the Everly's house and parked the car and sat there for about 15 minutes and realized I didn't need to speak to Jerry anymore. The event that had happened seemed to make the disagreement between Sherry and me so trivial, so minuscule. And so I cranked up the car and drove back to Queens. The first thing I did that day was call Sherry and say, let's talk. We got together, and amazingly, Sherry confessed that she had been wrong about everything. They didn't go for that part of the story. Well, you're right. That's not what happened. In fact, it didn't matter. It didn't matter who was right or wrong. And so Jesus reminds the disciples that he will not always be with them. Our family members, our friends, the people in our church family are rare treasures that are not permanent. Let us remember that when we live day to day, when we have disagreements or miscommunications, let us take time to put things into perspective. And let us take time to spend with one another and to wash each other's feet. Not with the cheap stuff, not with the leftovers, but with the good stuff. Amen and amen.